The stagecoach rattled into Scottsbluff, Nebraska on a blistering afternoon in July of 1878, carrying among its dusty passengers a young woman whose olive skin and dark almond-shaped eyes immediately marked her as different from anyone the frontier town had ever seen. Gianna Hawthorne clutched her worn carpet bag to her chest as the coach lurched to a stop outside the general store, her heart hammering with equal parts exhaustion and apprehension. The journey from San Francisco had been long and treacherous, but nothing could have prepared her for the silence that fell over Main Street when she stepped down onto the wooden boardwalk. She was 22 years old, the daughter of an Italian immigrant father and a Chinese mother, born in a San Francisco boarding house and raised between two worlds that never quite accepted her. When her parents had died of typhoid within days of each other that spring, she had found among her father's papers a deed to a small property in Nebraska left to him by a former business partner. With nothing keeping her in California and creditors circling like vultures, Gianna had sold everything she could and bought passage east, hoping against hope that Nebraska might offer her the fresh start she desperately needed. But as she stood on that sun-bleached street, feeling the weight of a dozen hostile stares, she realized how foolish that hope had been. "What in the blazes is that?" a voice carried from the doorway of the saloon. "Some kind of Oriental, looks like," another answered. "She lost or something?" Gianna straightened her shoulders and walked toward the general store, pretending she did not hear them. She had learned long ago that showing fear only made things worse. The proprietor, a thin man with a severe face and wire-rimmed spectacles, looked up from his ledger as she entered. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone making it clear he hoped the answer was no. "I'm looking for information about a property," Gianna said, her English perfect, but accented with the musical lilt of her mother's Cantonese and the rolling R's of her father's Italian. "It belonged to Marco Hawthorne. I am his daughter." The proprietor's eyebrows rose. Marco Hawthorne's daughter. He never mentioned having any daughter, let alone one who looked like. He trailed off, but his meaning was clear. "Nevertheless, I am," Gianna replied firmly. She reached into her bag and produced the deed, its edges worn from her frequent examination during the long journey. "This says he owned 40 acres north of town." The man barely glanced at the paper. "That property went back to the county for unpaid taxes 2 years ago. Got bought up by Josiah Brenner last fall. He runs cattle on it now." The floor seemed to tilt beneath Gianna's feet. "That cannot be. My father's partner promised—" "Well, your father's partner is dead too. Been 5 years now. And even if that deed was worth the paper it is printed on, which I doubt, you would still need to pay the back taxes plus penalties." He named a sum that made Gianna's remaining funds seem like pocket change. "Now, if that is all, I have customers waiting." Gianna turned and saw that several townspeople had gathered in the doorway, their faces a mixture of curiosity and hostility. She felt her throat tighten, but refused to let them see her cry. She walked past them with her head high, stepping back out into the oppressive heat. "She should go back where she came from," someone muttered. "Probably some kind of Chinese prostitute," a woman's voice added, sharp with judgment. "She does not belong here," another agreed. Gianna kept walking, though she had no destination in mind. The town was small, just a collection of rough buildings clustered along the railroad tracks that had brought the first real prosperity to this part of Nebraska. Beyond the last building, the prairie stretched endlessly, golden and shimmering in the heat. She walked until the voices faded, until the town was behind her, until her legs simply refused to carry her further. She sank down in the shade of a scraggly cottonwood tree and finally allowed herself to cry. She was stranded in a place where no one wanted her, with barely enough money to survive a month, let alone buy passage back to California. And what would she return to anyway? There was nothing for her there. There was nothing for her anywhere. The sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon when she heard the sound of hoofbeats. Gianna looked up, hastily wiping her face, and saw a rider approaching from the north. As he drew closer, she realized he was unlike any man she had ever seen. He sat astride a massive bay horse, with the ease of someone who had been born in the saddle, but it was not his horsemanship that made her stare. He was enormous, well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to block out the sun. His hair fell past his shoulders in waves of dark brown, and a thick beard covered the lower half of his face. He wore buckskin trousers and a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms thick with muscle and tan dark from years under the prairie sun. A rifle rested across his saddle, and several rabbits hung from his saddle horn. He reined in his horse when he saw her, his eyes a startling shade of gray-blue, taking in her disheveled appearance with a look of concern rather than suspicion. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was deep and rough from disuse, as if he was not accustomed to speaking often. "I suppose I am," Gianna answered, too exhausted to lie. "Though not in the way you mean." He swung down from his horse with surprising grace for such a large man and approached slowly, as if afraid of startling her. Up close, she could see he was younger than she had first thought, perhaps 28 or 30, with lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of long hours squinting into the distance. "Name is Xander Zane," he said. "I have a cabin about 5 miles north of here. Been in town for supplies." "I came on the stagecoach this afternoon," Gianna said. "I thought I had inherited property here, but it seems I was mistaken." Xander's expression darkened. "Let me guess. Josiah Brenner now owns it?" "So the man at the general store said." "That sounds about right. Brenner has been buying up every piece of land he can get his hands on, legal or otherwise." He studied her for a moment. "You have anywhere to stay tonight?" Gianna shook her head. She had not even thought that far ahead, had been too shocked by the loss of her one hope. "There's a boarding house in town, run by a widow named Mrs. Fletcher. She is decent enough, unlike some others around here." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I heard some of what they were saying about you. I'm sorry for that. This town can be hard on outsiders." "And you are not an outsider?" Gianna asked. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I am what they call a mountain man, though there are not any real mountains around here. Spend most of my time out on the prairie, hunting and trapping. Come into town maybe once a month for supplies. I suppose that makes me enough of an outsider that they tolerate me, but do not exactly embrace me either." "Why do you stay?" "Because out here, away from all the noise and judgment, a man can be free." He offered her his hand. "Come on. I will walk you back to town. Make sure you get settled at the boarding house." Gianna took his hand, feeling the rough calluses on his palm, the strength in his grip as he helped her to her feet. He untied one of the rabbits from his saddle and handed it to her. "Give this to Mrs. Fletcher. She will give you a better rate if you bring something for supper." They walked back toward town together, Xander leading his horse. He did not try to fill the silence with meaningless chatter, for which Gianna was grateful. She found herself studying him from the corner of her eye, fascinated by this quiet giant who showed her more kindness in 10 minutes than the entire town had in hours. "Why did you help me?" she asked finally. Xander was quiet for a long moment. "I know what it is like to not fit in," he said at last. "My ma was Lakota. My pa was a fur trader from Kentucky. Neither side ever quite accepted me. The whites thought I was too Indian. The Indians thought I was too white. Eventually, I just stopped trying to please anyone but myself." "I'm sorry," Gianna said softly. "Do not be. It made me stronger. Taught me that the only opinion that matters is your own." He glanced at her. "What is your name?" "Gianna Hawthorne." "That's a pretty name. Italian?" "My father was from Naples. My mother was from Canton." She waited for the judgment, the disapproval she had seen so many times before. Instead, Xander just nodded. "That must have made for interesting cooking in your house." Despite everything, Gianna laughed. It was such an unexpected response, so perfectly mundane that it startled the sound out of her. "My mother used to make dumplings with tomato sauce. My father loved them." "Sounds good to me." They reached the edge of town as the sun touched the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. People stopped to stare at the odd pair, the foreign girl and the mountain man, but Xander's presence seemed to shield her from the worst of their hostility. He led her to a small white house at the end of the street and knocked on the door. Mrs. Fletcher turned out to be a plump woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and silver-streaked hair pulled back in a practical bun. She looked from Xander to Gianna and back again, clearly assessing the situation. "Mrs. Fletcher, this is Gianna Hawthorne. She needs a room for a while. She brought you a rabbit for supper." Mrs. Fletcher took the rabbit and examined it with an expert eye. "That's a nice fat one. I suppose I can find a room." She looked at Gianna more closely. "You are Marco's daughter. I heard you arrived today, heard some other things too. I imagine you did, Gianna said quietly. Well, I do not put much stock in gossip. If Xander vouches for you, that is good enough for me. He has better judgment than most folks in this town. She stepped aside. Come in, child. You look exhausted. Gianna felt tears prick her eyes again at the simple kindness. Thank you. Xander touched the brim of his hat. I will be heading back out tomorrow morning, but I will check on you when I am next in town. You do not have to do that, Gianna said. I know. He met her eyes, and something in his steady gaze made her breath catch. But I will anyway. She watched him walk away, leading his horse toward the livery stable, and felt an odd sense of loss, as if something important was slipping through her fingers. Mrs. Fletcher put a gentle hand on her shoulder. Come on, dear. Let us get you fed and into a proper bed. Things always look better in the morning. But morning brought no improvement to Gianna's situation. She counted her remaining money over breakfast and realized she had enough for perhaps 3 weeks at the boarding house if she was very careful, and nothing beyond that. She needed work, but who in this town would hire her? Mrs. Fletcher seemed to read her thoughts. The laundry down the street is always looking for help. The work is hard, but Mrs. Chen, who runs it, is a good woman. She's Chinese, came over with the railroad workers. Do you think she would hire me? I think she would appreciate having someone who might understand her. She's been here 5 years and still barely speaks English. Her husband was killed in a construction accident, and she took over his laundry business to survive. Gianna felt a spark of hope. Could you show me where it is? The laundry was a long, low building near the railroad tracks, steam billowing from its windows even in the morning heat. Inside, a tiny woman bent over a washboard, her hands red and raw from the lye soap. She looked up when Gianna entered, and her eyes widened in surprise. Gianna spoke to her in Cantonese, and the woman's face transformed with joy at hearing her native language. They talked for over an hour, and by the end of it, Gianna had a job. The pay was minimal, barely enough to cover her room and board, but it was something. It was a start. The work was brutal. Gianna's hands blistered within the first week, and her back ached from bending over the washboards. But Mrs. Chen was kind, and in the steamy confines of the laundry, away from the hostile stares of the townspeople, Gianna found a small measure of peace. She did not see Xander for nearly 3 weeks. She found herself thinking about him at odd moments, wondering where he was, what he was doing out on the vast prairie. When he finally appeared at the boarding house one evening in early August, her heart gave an unexpected leap. "How are you settling in?" he asked after Mrs. Fletcher had ushered him into the parlor. "Well enough. I found work at the laundry." Something that might have been concern flickered across his face. "That is hard work." "I'm not afraid of hard work." "I never thought you were." He shifted his weight, seeming uncertain. "I was wondering if you might like to see the prairie. The real prairie, not just the view from town. I'm heading out again tomorrow for about a week. You could come with me for a day if you wanted. Get away from this place for a while." Gianna knew she should refuse. It would not be proper, going off alone with a man she barely knew. But propriety had never done much for her, and the thought of escaping the town's judgmental stares for even a day was irresistible. "I would like that," she said. They set out at dawn, Gianna riding behind Xander on his bay horse. He kept the pace easy, pointing out features of the landscape that she would have otherwise missed. A prairie dog town, the residents standing upright like sentinels. A buffalo wallow, though the great herds were mostly gone now. The abandoned lodge of a family of beavers. They stopped for lunch beside a creek lined with cottonwoods, and Xander produced bread and cheese from his saddlebags. The water ran clear and cool over smooth stones, and birds sang in the branches overhead. It was the most peaceful place Gianna had been since leaving San Francisco. "Do you ever get lonely?" she asked. "Out here by yourself?" Xander considered the question. "Sometimes. But I find loneliness easier to bear than judgment." "I understand that." "I thought you might." He looked at her, his gray-blue eyes serious. "Can I ask you something? Why did you stay? After you found out about the property, why did you not just get on the next stagecoach back to California?" "Because there is nothing for me in California. At least here I have a job, a place to sleep. It may not be much, but it is more than I had there." "You could go somewhere else. a bigger city where people might be more accepting. I thought about that. But I have barely enough money to eat, let alone buy train passage to Denver or Chicago. She picked up a smooth stone from the creek bed and turned it over in her palm. Besides, I am tired of running. My whole life, I have been trying to find a place where I fit. Maybe I will never fit anywhere. Maybe the best I can hope for is to carve out a small space where people will tolerate me. You deserve better than tolerance, Xander said quietly. Their eyes met, and Gianna felt something shift between them, an awareness that had been building since that first afternoon under the cottonwood tree. She saw in his face a reflection of her own isolation, her own hunger for connection. We should head back, she said, suddenly frightened by the intensity of the feeling. The ride back to town was silent, but it was a comfortable silence, charged with possibility. After that, Xander made excuses to come to town more often. He brought fresh meat to the boarding house, claiming Mrs. Fletcher had done him favors in the past, and he was repaying her kindness. He needed supplies from the general store more frequently. He had business at the land office. Gianna knew the real reason, and her heart sang with it. They would take walks together in the evenings when the heat had died down and the prairie glowed gold in the sunset. He taught her to identify animal tracks and read the weather in the clouds. She told him about her childhood in San Francisco, about her parents, about the strange liminal space she had always occupied between cultures. My mother used to say I was a bridge, she told him one evening as they sat by the creek, that I could connect two worlds, but I always felt more like I was falling into the gap between them. Maybe you just had not found the right place to plant your feet, Xander said. He was not a man of many words, but when he spoke, his words mattered. Gianna found herself falling for him with the intensity that frightened her. She had never felt this way about anyone, had never imagined she would. In San Francisco, the few men who had shown interest in her had wanted something exotic, a curiosity to show off or use. Xander saw her as simply herself, neither diminished nor exoticized by her heritage. But as August bled into September, storm clouds gathered in more ways than one. Josiah Brenner had noticed Xander's frequent visits to town, and he did not like it. Brenner was a powerful man in Scottsbluff, the largest landowner in the county, and a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. He had been pressuring Mrs. Fletcher to sell her boarding house, wanting to expand his holdings into town itself. Mrs. Fletcher had refused, but Brenner was not a man who accepted refusal gracefully. One evening in mid-September, Gianna was walking back from the laundry when she found her path blocked by Brenner and two of his ranch hands. Brenner was a thick-set man in his 50s with cold eyes and a mouth like a knife slash. "You are Marco Hawthorne's daughter," he said. It was not a question. "I am. I own the land your father used to hold deed to, bought it fair and square from the county." "So I have been told." "I'm willing to make you an offer. You sign a paper saying you have no claim to that land, and I will give you enough money to get out of Nebraska. Go back to where you came from." Gianna felt anger rise in her chest. "I do not have any claim to the land. The man at the general store made that very clear. You do not need me to sign anything." "Just being cautious. There are bleeding heart judges sometimes who get sympathetic to sad stories. I like my property rights clear." He pulled a paper from his pocket. $500. That is more than generous. It was more money than Gianna would make in a year at the laundry, enough to start over somewhere else, somewhere bigger, where she might truly disappear into the crowds. But the way Brenner was looking at her like she was something stuck to the bottom of his boot that he needed to scrape off made her stubborn. "No thank you," she said, trying to step around him. One of the ranch hands moved to block her path. "Boss made you a fair offer, and I declined. Now please let me pass." "You think you are clever, do you not?" Brenner's voice was ugly now. "Coming here, getting your hooks into Xander Zane, thinking maybe you can use him to cause trouble for me. But let me tell you something, girl. Xander is nothing. A half-breed trapper living in a shack, barely better than the savages his mother came from. He has no power here, no influence, and you have even less. She does not need power or influence. She has me." They all turned. Xander stood at the end of the street, his rifle held loosely in his hands. He was not pointing it at anyone, but the threat was implicit. In the fading light, he looked dangerous, all that contained strength suddenly visible. "This is none of your business, Zane," Brenner said. You made it my business when you decided to threaten someone under my protection. Xander's voice was level, but there was steel underneath. Now step aside and let her pass. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Brenner jerked his head at his men, and they stepped back. Gianna hurried to Xander's side. This is not over, Brenner said. She does not belong here. Neither do you, for that matter. The decent people of this town agree with me. Then I suppose it is fortunate I do not give a damn what the decent people of this town think. Xander put his hand on the small of Gianna's back and guided her away. They walked in silence until they reached the boarding house. Gianna was shaking, though whether from fear or anger or the after-effects of the confrontation, she could not say. Are you all right? Xander asked. I am fine. Just rattled. She looked up at him. You should not have done that. Brenner is a powerful man. He could make trouble for you. He has been trying to make trouble for me for years. He wants my cabin, wants the land I hunt on. He wants everything. I am done stepping aside for men like him. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. And I'm especially done standing by while they threaten you. Gianna leaned into his touch, her eyes closing. What am I going to do, Xander? I cannot keep living like this, looking over my shoulder, wondering when someone is going to decide I need to leave. Then do not. She opened her eyes. What? Come live with me, at my cabin. He said it simply, as if he was offering her a cup of coffee. It is rough, but it is solid. Good water from a spring. Game is plentiful. You would be safe there. I cannot do that. It would not be proper. You could if you married me. Gianna's breath caught. You are asking me to marry you? I suppose I am. A faint smile touched his lips. Not doing a very good job of it, am I? My ma would be ashamed. He took both her hands in his. Gianna, I know we have not known each other long, but I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. When I'm out on the prairie, you are all I think about. When I come back to town, seeing you is the only thing that matters. I know I cannot offer you much. I am not a rich man. I cannot give you fine dresses or a big house, but I can give you a home where you will be safe, where no one will judge you or make you feel like you do not belong. Because you do belong. You belong with me. Tears were streaming down Gianna's face, but they were not sad tears. Yes. Yes? Yes, I will marry you. Xander let out a breath she had not realized he was holding. Then he pulled her into his arms, and she felt the solid strength of him surrounding her, sheltering her. When he kissed her, it was gentle at first, tentative, as if he was afraid she might break. But Gianna kissed him back, with all the longing she'd been holding inside, and the kiss deepened, became something that spoke of promises and passion, and a future she had not dared imagine. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Xander rested his forehead against hers. I will make you happy, he said. I swear it. You already have. They were married 3 days later by a traveling circuit judge who happened to be passing through Scottsbluff. Mrs. Fletcher and Mrs. Chen served as witnesses, both women crying tears of joy. The ceremony was held in Mrs. Fletcher's parlor, and afterward, the four of them shared a simple meal of roasted chicken and potatoes. You are a lucky man, Xander Zane, Mrs. Fletcher said, raising her glass of cider, and you are a lucky woman, Gianna. I hope you will be very happy together. We will be, Xander said, his hand tightening around Gianna's. We will be. That night, they rode out to Xander's cabin, Gianna sitting in front of him on the saddle, his arms around her. The moon was full and bright, turning the prairie to silver. Gianna leaned back against her husband's chest, feeling his heartbeat against her spine, and thought that she had never felt so safe, so wanted, so completely at home. The cabin was exactly as Xander had described it, rough but solid. It was built of logs with a sod roof, one large room with a stone fireplace at one end and a rope bed at the other. A table and 2 chairs stood near the fireplace, and shelves lined the walls, holding Xander's few possessions. It was sparse and simple, but Gianna loved it immediately. It is not much, Xander said, sounding uncertain for the first time. It is perfect. He lit a fire in the fireplace, even though the night was not cold, and the flames cast dancing shadows on the walls. They stood together in front of the fire, and Gianna felt suddenly shy, aware that they were truly alone for the first time, that this man was now her husband. "I have never done this before," she said softly. "I do not know what to do." "Neither have I," Xander admitted. "We will figure it out together." He kissed her again, and the shyness melted away. They explored each other slowly, learning the landscape of bodies and hearts, and when they finally came together, it was with a tenderness that brought tears to Gianna's eyes. Later, lying in his arms with the fire burning low, she thought that this must be what it felt like to truly belong somewhere, not to a place, but to a person. The next weeks passed in a blur of happiness. Gianna had not known it was possible to be so content. She woke each morning to Xander's arms around her and fell asleep each night the same way. During the days, he taught her to hunt and trap, to read the signs of the prairie, to survive in this wild land. She taught him to make the dishes of her childhood, improvising with what they had available. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, or sometimes they did not talk at all, simply existing together in comfortable silence. But they couldn't escape the world forever. When they returned to Scottsbluff in early October for supplies, the hostility was palpable. People stared at them with open disgust, and more than one person made comments loud enough to be overheard. "Mountain man and his foreign bride, both outsiders. Makes sense they would end up together. She does not belong here. He barely does either. Probably doing all sorts of heathen things out there in the wilderness." Xander's jaw tightened, but he said nothing, just kept his hand on Gianna's back as they walked to the general store. The proprietor served them with barely concealed contempt, practically throwing their purchases onto the counter. They were loading the supplies onto Xander's horse when Brenner appeared with a group of men behind him. Gianna recognized several of them as prominent townspeople, including the mayor and the banker. "We want to talk to you, Zane," Brenner said. "I have nothing to say to you." "Then just listen. This town has had a meeting. We have decided that we do not want that woman here." He jerked his chin toward Gianna. "She is foreign. She does not belong here. Bad enough we have the Chinese working on the railroad, but at least they keep to themselves. But you are trying to make this one part of the community, and we will not have it. Gianna is my wife. She is part of the community whether you like it or not." "We are prepared to make you an offer," the banker said. "Leave Scottsbluff. Go somewhere else, anywhere else. We will pay for your passage and give you enough money to get started somewhere new." "Go to hell," Xander said flatly. "You are making a mistake," Brenner said. "We can make your life very difficult." "You already do. Has not changed my mind yet. We are trying to be reasonable here. But if you will not listen to reason, there are other ways to handle this situation." Xander's hand moved to the rifle on his saddle. "Is that a threat?" "It is a warning. Accidents happen out on the prairie. People get lost. They do not come back." Brenner's eyes were cold. "Think about what you are doing, Zane. Think about whether that foreign woman is worth dying for." "She is worth killing for," Xander said quietly. "So I would advise you to be very careful about what you do next." The two men stared at each other, and the tension was so thick Gianna could barely breathe. Finally, Brenner stepped back. "You have been warned. What happens next is on your head." They rode back to the cabin in grim silence. Gianna could see the anger radiating off Xander, could feel the tension in his body. When they reached the cabin, he helped her down from the horse and then began to unload the supplies with sharp, jerky movements. "Xander," she said softly, "I am fine." "You're not fine. Neither am I." He stopped, his shoulders slumping. "I'm sorry. You should not have to deal with this." "We should not have to deal with this, but we do." She went to him, put her hand on his chest. "What are we going to do?" "I do not know, but I'm not leaving. This is my home, and I'm not letting them drive you away either." He covered her hand with his. "I will not let anyone hurt you. I promise you that." But promises, Gianna was learning, were easier to make than to keep. A week later, someone set fire to one of Xander's trap lines, destroying weeks of work. 2 weeks after that, they found their water source had been fouled with dead animals. Each incident was small enough to be dismissed as bad luck or accident, but together they formed a pattern that was impossible to ignore. Xander started sleeping with his rifle beside the bed. He insisted that Gianna stay close to the cabin when he was out checking his traps. The easy happiness of those first weeks was gone, replaced by a constant low-level anxiety. "Maybe we should leave," Gianna said one night in late October as they lay in bed. Go to Denver or California. Start over somewhere no one knows us. Is that what you want? I want us to be safe. I want to stop looking over my shoulder. If we leave, they win. They get to decide who belongs and who does not, who deserves a home and who does not. I am tired of running, Gianna. I ran from the white world. I ran from the Indian world. I carved out this little space here, and I will be damned if I let them take it from me. Even if it costs us our lives, it will not come to that. But Gianna was not so sure. She had seen the look in Brenner's eyes, the cold determination of a man who was used to getting what he wanted, and she knew from experience that people like that did not stop until they were forced to stop. The first snow came in early November, a light dusting that melted by afternoon. Xander had gone into town to see if he could find anyone who would buy his furs, and Gianna was alone at the cabin when she heard the horses approaching. She looked out the window and saw Brenner and 2 of his men riding up. Panic flooded through her, but she forced herself to remain calm. She grabbed Xander's spare rifle from the corner and stood in the doorway. "You're not welcome here," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Brenner reined in his horse. "Where's your husband?" "Not here, and I'm armed, so I suggest you leave." "Look at that. The little foreign girl thinks she is tough." Brenner smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Put the gun down before you hurt yourself." "I know how to use it. Xander taught me. Now leave. We are done playing games. You have 1 week to clear out. If you are still here after that, we will burn this cabin to the ground, with or without you in it. You cannot do that. This is Xander's land. This is public land. Xander has been squatting here for years, but he has no legal claim to it. I, however, have filed a homestead claim. In 6 months, this will be mine legally. But I am done waiting. Consider this your final warning." They rode away, and Gianna sank down onto the doorstep, the rifle trembling in her hands. When Xander returned an hour later, she told him everything. His face went carefully blank, the way it did when he was trying to control strong emotion. "He's lying about the homestead claim. I filed papers on this land 3 years ago." "Are you sure?" "I have the documents. They are recorded at the land office in the county seat." But doubt flickered in his eyes. "At least, they should be." They rode to Chadron, the county seat, the next morning. It took 2 days to get there, 2 days of mounting dread. At the land office, a bored clerk pulled out the records and shook his head. "No record of any filing by Xander Zane, but I have a homestead claim filed by Josiah Brenner 6 months ago for that parcel." "That is impossible. I filed 3 years ago. I have the receipt right here." Xander pulled the document from his coat. The clerk examined it. "This is a receipt. Sure enough. But there is no corresponding record in our books. Could be it got lost somehow. Could be the clerk who took it never recorded it properly. Either way, without a record, it does not exist legally. And since Brenner has a valid claim on file, the land is his." Xander's hands clenched into fists. "Brenner paid someone to destroy my records." "That's a serious accusation. You have any proof?" "Just that my records have conveniently disappeared." "Then there's nothing I can do. If you want to dispute Brenner's claim, you will have to take it to a judge, but I will tell you right now, without documentation, you will not win." They rode back to the cabin in defeated silence. Gianna wanted to say something comforting, but what comfort was there? They were going to lose their home. That night, lying in bed, Xander finally spoke. "I'm sorry. I thought I could give you a home, a place where you would be safe, but I have failed." "You have not failed. This is not your fault. I should have checked on those records, should have made sure they were properly filed." "How could you have known someone would be corrupt enough to destroy them?" Gianna rolled over to face him. "Brenner is the one at fault here. He is the one who should be ashamed. Men like Brenner do not feel shame. They just take what they want and justify it however they can. So what do we do?" Xander was quiet for a long time. "I do not know." The week Brenner had given them passed in a haze of uncertainty. They talked about leaving, about staying and fighting, about dozens of possibilities. But every path seemed to lead to loss. On the 7th day, they woke to find a group of riders surrounding the cabin. Brenner sat at their head, and this time he had at least a dozen men with him. "Time is up," he called out. "Come on out." Xander grabbed his rifle. "Stay inside. I am not letting you face them alone. "Gianna, please." But she followed him out onto the porch, her own rifle in hand. They stood side by side, facing down the mounted men. "You need to leave," Brenner said. "Now." "This is my home," Xander replied. "I am not going anywhere." "Then you leave me no choice." Brenner nodded to his men, and they began to dismount. "You take one step closer, and I will shoot," Xander said. "You might get 1 or 2 of us, but there are 12 of us and 2 of you. You will lose." Xander raised his rifle, and Gianna saw his finger move to the trigger. This was it. This was where it would end, in blood and violence, everything they had built together destroyed. "Hold on there!" Everyone turned. A group of riders was approaching from the east, moving fast. As they drew closer, Gianna recognized Mrs. Chen at the front, and behind her, at least 20 Chinese railroad workers, all armed. Mrs. Chen pulled up beside the cabin and spoke rapidly in Cantonese to Gianna. "We heard what Brenner was planning. We came to help." Before Gianna could respond, another group of riders appeared from the south. To her amazement, she saw several Lakota warriors, and at their head, an older woman with silver-streaked braids and eyes the same shade of gray-blue as Xander's. The woman spoke in Lakota, and Xander answered in the same language, his voice choked with emotion. "My mother," he said to Gianna. "I have not seen her in 5 years." Xander's mother dismounted and walked to the porch. She looked at Gianna for a long moment, then said something else in Lakota. "She says you have kind eyes," Xander translated. "She says she's glad I found someone to stand with." "Tell her I am honored to meet her," Xander translated, and his mother smiled. Brenner was looking around at the assembled groups, his face darkening. "This does not change anything. That is my land." "Actually, it is not." A new voice entered the fray. A man in a suit rode up on a sleek black horse, and Gianna saw the silver star pinned to his vest. A federal marshal. "Who the hell are you?" Brenner demanded. "Marshal Thomas Whitfield. I have been investigating complaints about land fraud in this county. Seems there have been a number of homestead records that have gone missing over the past few years, all for properties that ended up being claimed by you, Mr. Brenner." He pulled a sheaf of papers from his saddlebag. "I went through the archives in Denver and found copies of all the original filings, including Mr. Zane's claim to this property. I also found evidence that you bribed the clerk in Chadron to destroy records and file false claims. You are under arrest." 2 more marshals appeared from behind Whitfield, their guns drawn. Brenner's men looked at each other uncertainly. "Anyone who wants to face federal charges for interfering with a marshal, feel free to make a move," Whitfield said calmly. "Otherwise, I suggest you all head home." One by one, Brenner's men turned their horses and rode away, leaving Brenner alone. The marshals took him into custody, and just like that, it was over. Xander stood on the porch, looking dazed. "I do not understand. How did the marshal know to come?" Mrs. Fletcher pushed her way through the crowd on foot, panting from exertion. "I wrote to the territorial governor 3 weeks ago, told him about Brenner's corruption, about how he had been stealing land and threatening people. I knew someone in Denver who owed me a favor, and I called it in." "You did that for us?" Gianna asked. "I did it for what was right," Mrs. Fletcher replied. "And yes, I did it for you, both of you. You deserved better than to be run out of your own home." Gianna felt tears streaming down her face. She looked around at all the people who had come to their aid. Mrs. Chen and the Chinese workers who had been treated as less than human by so many in the town. Xander's mother and her people who had been driven from their lands and hunted like animals. Mrs. Fletcher who had stood up for decency when so many others had chosen cruelty. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. Mrs. Chen smiled. "You gave me friendship when I was alone. That is thanks enough." Xander's mother spoke again, and Xander translated. "She says family helps family, and you are family now." The marshal tipped his hat. "I will need statements from both of you. But for now, this land is legally yours, Mr. Zane. No one can take that away." After the marshal left with Brenner in custody, they invited everyone into the cabin. It was crowded, but no one seemed to mind. Gianna and Mrs. Chen cooked a huge meal with contributions from everyone, and they ate together, this unlikely gathering of outcasts and outsiders who had found common cause. Xander's mother stayed for a week, and in that time, Gianna got to know her. Her name was Winona, and she was a healer among her people. She had loved Xander's father deeply, but he had been killed by thieves when Xander was only 10. After that, she had returned to her people, but Xander had chosen to stay in the white world, trying to make his way. "I was angry with him for a long time," Winona said through Xander's translation, "but I understand now. He needed to find his own path, and he has found a good one." On the day Winona left, she gave Gianna a medicine bag. "For protection," she said, "and for good luck. You will need both, raising my son's children." Gianna blushed, but she accepted the gift with gratitude. After Winona and her people rode away, Xander pulled Gianna into his arms. "You've given me something I never thought I would have," he said. "A family, a real family, not just people who tolerate me." "You have given me the same thing." They stood together watching the prairie stretch endlessly before them, golden in the autumn light. Winter was coming, hard and cold, but they would face it together, and in the spring, new life would come. As it turned out, new life came sooner than that. By December, Gianna was certain she was pregnant. She told Xander on Christmas Eve, and she had never seen him so happy. He picked her up and spun her around, laughing, and then set her down gently as if afraid she might break. "I am not fragile," she told him, amused. "I know, but I'm going to take care of you anyway." The winter was brutal, but the cabin was warm and well stocked. Xander hunted when the weather allowed, and they spent long evenings by the fire talking about the future. They chose names for the baby, arguing playfully about whether traditional or modern names were better. They made plans for expanding the cabin, adding a second room for children. "Children plural?" Gianna asked, raising an eyebrow. "Well, this one will need brothers and sisters." "You seem very sure we're having more than one." "I am an optimist," he kissed her forehead. "Besides, I like the process of making them." Gianna laughed and swatted his arm, but she was smiling. In February, they made their first trip back to Scottsbluff since Brenner's arrest. The town was different now. The mayor had been forced to resign when it came out that he had been aware of Brenner's corruption and done nothing. The new mayor was a rancher from outside town, a fair man with no patience for prejudice. People still stared at Xander and Gianna, but the open hostility was gone. A few people even nodded greetings. Mrs. Fletcher hugged them both fiercely and insisted on throwing them a belated wedding celebration. "The baby is due in July," Gianna told her. Mrs. Fletcher's eyes lit up. "Oh, how wonderful. I will knit booties." Word spread quickly, and by the time they left town, they had been given more baby clothes, blankets, and advice than they knew what to do with. Even the proprietor at the general store was civil, though he did not go so far as to smile. "Change comes slowly," Xander said as they rode home. "But it does come." The baby arrived on a sweltering day in mid-July. Winona had come 2 weeks earlier to help with the birth, and Mrs. Fletcher arrived the day before labor started, as if she had sensed it coming. Gianna labored for 18 hours, and there were moments when she thought she could not do it, could not survive this. But Winona and Mrs. Fletcher guided her through it, and Xander held her hand and told her she was the strongest person he had ever known. When the baby finally arrived, red-faced and screaming, Gianna wept with relief and joy. It was a boy, healthy and perfect. "What will you name him?" Winona asked. Gianna looked at Xander. They had argued about names for months, neither willing to concede, but looking at their son, she knew. "Xavier," she said. "Xavier Marco Zane." Xander's eyes filled with tears. Xavier was close to his own name, carrying on that tradition. Marco honored her father, and Zane tied them all together. "It is perfect," he whispered. The first year of Xavier's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant amazement. Gianna had never known love could be like this, fierce and consuming and terrifying all at once. Every milestone from his first smile to his first tooth felt like a miracle. They expanded the cabin the following spring, adding 2 more rooms. "Planning ahead," Xander said with a grin, and Gianna did not argue. She was pregnant again, due in the fall. This time, the labor was shorter, and the baby was a girl. They named her Lucia Winona Zane, and she had her father's gray-blue eyes and her mother's dark hair. Life settled into a rhythm. Xander trapped and hunted, Gianna tended the garden and the children. They made regular trips to Scottsbluff, and each time the town seemed a little more welcoming. Mrs. Chen had expanded her laundry business and hired 2 more workers. She and Gianna remained close friends, and their children played together whenever they came to town. Xander's relationship with his mother had been fully repaired, and Winona visited several times a year, teaching her grandchildren about their Lakota heritage. She taught Xavier to track animals and Lucia to identify healing plants. The children adored her. When Xavier was 5 and Lucia was 3, a third child arrived, another boy they named Marco. And 2 years after that, twin girls completed their family. They named the twins Elena and Rosa, after Gianna's grandmothers. The cabin had grown into a proper house by then, with 4 bedrooms and a large main room where they all gathered in the evenings. The children were a noisy, chaotic, joyful bunch, their mixed heritage visible in the varied shades of their skin and eyes. They were being raised to be proud of all parts of their ancestry, to see their diversity as strength rather than weakness. Scottsbluff had changed too. More immigrants had arrived, drawn by the railroad and the promise of land. Chinese, Irish, German, Mexican, all bringing their own cultures and traditions. The town was more cosmopolitan now, more accepting. Or perhaps it was simply that the old guard had died off, replaced by younger people who cared less about who belonged and more about building a community. Xander and Gianna became respected members of that community. Xander served on the town council for several years, advocating for fair treatment of all residents regardless of origin. Gianna opened a small restaurant that served the food of her childhood, teaching the next generation about the cuisines that had shaped her. It became one of the most popular establishments in town. But it was not all smooth sailing. There were still people who disapproved of their mixed-race family, who made cruel comments or crossed the street to avoid them. There were still moments of prejudice and injustice that made Gianna's blood boil. But they faced it together, she and Xander and their growing family, and they taught their children to be strong, to be proud, to never let anyone make them feel less than. On their 10th anniversary, they rode out to the creek where Xander had first taken Gianna, leaving the children with Mrs. Fletcher for the day. They sat by the water, older now but no less in love, and reflected on the life they had built. "Do you ever regret it?" Xander asked. "Staying here instead of going to a big city where things might have been easier?" Gianna leaned against his shoulder. "Not for a moment. This is where I belong. With you. With our family. This is home." "She does not belong here," they said. "But you said I belonged with you." "I did. And I was right." He kissed the top of her head. "I am always right." Gianna laughed. "Do not get cocky." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the water flow over the stones. A hawk circled overhead, riding the thermals. The prairie stretched away in all directions, wild and beautiful and home. The years continued to pass. Xavier grew into a young man as tall and broad-shouldered as his father, with the same quiet strength. He became a rancher, buying his own land and running cattle. Lucia married a schoolteacher from back east, a gentleman who treated her like a queen. Marco became a lawyer, fighting for the rights of immigrants and minorities. The twins stayed closer to home, Elena marrying a Lakota man from Winona's tribe, and Rosa opening a bakery in Scottsbluff that became famous throughout the territory. Xander and Gianna became grandparents, and then great-grandparents. They grew old together, their hair turning gray, their movements slower. But the love between them never dimmed. If anything, it deepened, becoming something richer and more complex with each passing year. On a warm spring day in 1918, 40 years after Gianna had first arrived in Scottsbluff, Xander died peacefully in his sleep, Gianna holding his hand. He was 70 years old, and he had lived a good life, a full life, a life that mattered. Gianna mourned him deeply, but she did not regret a single moment they had shared. He had given her everything she had ever needed, a home, a family, acceptance, love. He had looked at her that first day under the cottonwood tree and seen not a foreigner, not an outsider, but simply a person who needed help. And then he had fallen in love with that person, had built a life with her, had stood beside her against all the forces that tried to tear them apart. She lived for another 5 years after his death, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, all of them carrying forward the legacy of love and acceptance that she and Xander had built. She told them stories of the old days, of the prejudice they had faced and overcome, of the people who had helped them along the way. She taught them to be kind, to be brave, to stand up for what was right. And when she died at the age of 67, she was buried beside Xander in a small cemetery overlooking the prairie they had both loved. Their graves were marked with a simple stone that read, "Xander and Gianna Zane. They belong together." The house they had built still stood, though it was occupied now by one of the twins and her family. The creek still flowed clear and cold. The prairie still stretched endlessly toward the horizon. And in Scottsbluff, now a thriving small city, people still told the story of the foreign girl and the mountain man who had refused to let hate and prejudice drive them away, who had stood together and built something beautiful in the face of everything the world threw at them. Their children carried on their work, fighting for justice and equality. Their grandchildren spread across the country, taking with them the lessons they had learned about the importance of accepting all people, regardless of where they came from or what they looked like. And their great-grandchildren grew up in a world that was slowly, painfully, but undeniably becoming more tolerant, more understanding, more just. The legacy of Xander and Gianna Zane lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the very fabric of the community they had helped to shape. Scottsbluff had been transformed from a place that shouted, "She does not belong here," to a place that welcomed everyone, that celebrated diversity, that understood that belonging was not about where you came from, but about the connections you forged and the life you built. It had started with one man who saw a lonely, frightened woman sitting under a cottonwood tree and decided to help her, who looked past her foreign face and saw a kindred spirit, who stood up to bullies and bigots and said, "She belongs with me now." And from that simple act of kindness, of recognition, of love, an entire world had been born. Years later, when historians studied the transformation of small frontier towns in the American West, they often pointed to Scottsbluff as an example of how change could happen. They noted the arrest of Josiah Brenner and the subsequent reforms that had swept through the county. They documented the increasing diversity of the population and the corresponding decrease in racial violence. They analyzed economic trends and social movements and political shifts. But they sometimes missed the human story at the heart of it all. The story of two people who should not have fit together according to the rules of their time and place, but who loved each other anyway, who built a family that bridged cultures and heritages, who showed, through the simple act of living their lives with dignity and courage, that the barriers between people were artificial, that love could transcend any difference, that home was not a place, but a person, or a family, or a feeling of belonging that no one had the right to take away. The last surviving child of Xander and Gianna Zane, Rosa, lived to be 93 years old. Before she died in 1968, she gave an interview to a local newspaper, and the reporter asked her what she thought was the most important thing her parents had taught her. Rosa was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, "They taught me that you do not have to accept the world as it is, that one person or two people standing together can change things, that love is stronger than hate, always, and that everyone deserves a place to belong." "Do you think they succeeded," the reporter asked, "in changing things?" Rosa smiled, the same smile her father had worn, small and knowing. "Look around. Look at this town. Look at who lives here now, who is accepted, who is welcomed. Then tell me if you think they succeeded." The reporter looked, and he saw a town where Japanese families who had been unjustly interned during World War II now owned successful businesses, where Mexican immigrants worked side by side with descendants of the original European settlers, where the mayor was the great-grandson of Chinese railroad workers, where children of every color and background played together in integrated schools, where people still had their prejudices and problems, but where the official stance, the aspiration, was toward inclusion and equality rather than exclusion and hierarchy. It was not perfect. It never would be. But it was better. And it was better because two people had refused to accept injustice, had stood together against hate, and had built something worth fighting for. "Yes," the reporter said finally. "Yes, I think they did." Rosa nodded, satisfied. Then they did not live in vain. She died 3 weeks later, the last direct link to that day in 1878 when a scared young woman had stepped off a stagecoach and been met with hostility and contempt. But the story did not die with her. It lived on in the memories of the family, in the records of the town, in the very character of the place that Xander and Gianna had helped to shape. And sometimes, on warm spring evenings, people walking past the old cemetery would swear they could see two figures standing hand in hand by the graves overlooking the prairie. A tall, broad-shouldered man with long hair and a small, dark-eyed woman, both of them gazing out at the land they had loved, the home they had built together, the legacy they had left behind. It was probably just a trick of the light or the romantic imaginings of people who knew the story. But then again, maybe some loves really were strong enough to transcend even death. Maybe some bonds really did last forever. Either way, the story of Xander and Gianna Zane became part of the mythology of Scottsbluff, passed down from generation to generation. Parents told it to their children as an example of courage and love. Teachers taught it in schools as part of local history. And always, the lesson was the same, that every person deserves dignity and respect, that love can overcome any obstacle, and that home is not about where you were born, but about where you are accepted, where you are loved, where you belong. They had been told she did not belong, but they had been wrong. She had belonged exactly where she ended up, beside a mountain man with kind eyes and a fierce heart, raising a family, building a home, changing a town, leaving the world a little bit better than they had found it. And in the end, what more could anyone hope to accomplish in one lifetime? They had loved deeply. They had fought for what was right. They had created a family and a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. They had proven that belonging was not something granted by society, but something created through connection, through love, through the choice to stand beside someone and say, "You belong with me." That was the story of Xander and Gianna Zane. That was their gift to the world. And generations later, people were still grateful for it, still inspired by it, still learning from it. Because some stories, some loves, some acts of courage really do change everything. And this was one of them. The prairie wind continued to blow across the Nebraska plains, carrying with it the echoes of old voices, old promises, old loves that refused to be forgotten. The creek kept flowing, the grass kept growing, the seasons kept turning. Life went on, as it always does. But the memory remained, the lesson remained, the love remained. And that, perhaps, was the greatest triumph of all. That two people who had been told they did not belong had instead created a place where everyone could belong, where differences were celebrated rather than condemned, where love was stronger than prejudice, where home was defined not by where you came from, but by where you were welcomed, where you were valued, where you were loved. Xander had said it best that day 40 years earlier when he had stood on the porch of his cabin and faced down the mob that wanted to drive them away. "She belongs with me now." It was a simple statement, but it contained everything. A declaration of love, a promise of protection, a rejection of every social convention that said they could not or should not be together, a claim that no one else had the right to decide where someone belonged. And in making that claim, in standing by it even when it cost him, Xander had given Gianna the greatest gift anyone could give another person. He had given her a home, not a physical structure, though they had built a beautiful one together, but something deeper, more fundamental. A sense of being accepted completely, of being loved unconditionally, of being safe and valued and wanted exactly as she was. That was what had sustained her through all the years, through the prejudice and the struggles and the inevitable sorrows that came with living. That was what she had tried to pass on to her children and grandchildren. That was what made their story more than just a personal romance, but a template for how to live, how to love, how to build a better world, one relationship, one family, one choice at a time. And so the story of the foreign girl and the mountain man lived on, long after the principles had turned to dust. It lived in the hearts of those who heard it, in the actions of those who were inspired by it, in the better world that was slowly, painfully, but inexorably being built by people who believed, as Xander and Gianna had believed, that love was stronger than hate, that justice was worth fighting for, and that everyone, absolutely everyone, deserved a place to belong. They had been told she did not belong, but they had been wrong. So very, very wrong. She had belonged exactly where she ended up, and in finding her home, she had helped create a place where others could find theirs too. That was their legacy. That was their triumph. That was their love story, written not just in their own lives, but in the generations that followed, in the town that slowly changed, in the world that became, if only a little bit, more just and more kind because they had lived and loved and refused to give up. And really, what more could anyone ask of a life well lived? What more could any love story hope to achieve? Nothing more. Nothing more at all.